Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Dr. Jeffrey A. Robinson and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. The Traveling Salesman, Part 3. Glactyl and I are currently in the operations center of the Smithfield Packing Company in Virginia. Glactyl was my business partner. He is also an alien from another world. A couple years ago, he hired me to help him with business ventures on this world, and together, we had earned more than $10 billion selling things from his ship. Glactyl was, after all, the equivalent of an interstellar traveling salesman. However, despite accumulating incredible wealth, I had only found out recently that he had a different objective and a different reason for visiting our world. That was why he had spent almost his entire fortune purchasing this place, along with 13 of the other largest slaughterhouses in North America. His new company was called Shiva Logistics, and he now owned a large portion of this company. As I leaned on the windowsill of the ops center overlooking the giant stockyard below, I found myself uncomfortable. I found it difficult just looking out the window at the cattle yard where thousands of livestock were herded every day into a narrow chute that led to the kill point at the end of the stockyard. As if that weren't distressing enough, I found myself disturbed by the very atmosphere here. No matter how much they cleaned and scrubbed the air, no matter the quality and quantity of the HEPA filters that they used, the place still smelled like dirt, sweat, manure, and blood. It was definitely not my favorite place, and I found myself dreaming of being back on a beach in Bora Bora. I turned briefly to look at Glactyl. He always wore a disguise when he left his ship, and with his many lifelike masks, he actually managed to pass as a human being. Today, he had decided to dress up as a cowboy. Using his all-purpose unitool, he had created a disguise that he thought suitable for this adventure. The holographic image that masked his true form was that of a grizzled old man, complete with unkempt hair and a handlebar mustache. I had managed to talk him out of wearing chaps and spurs, but he had insisted on wearing a cowboy hat, a colorful flannel shirt, a bolo tie, jeans, and boots. His appearance had raised a few eyebrows when he had entered this facility today, but he didn't draw nearly the attention that he sometimes did. Turning back to stare out the window, I asked him, "Can you tell me again how buying this place works into your grand plans?" "It's all about physics," Glactyl replied, dropping into his lecture mode. Glactyl loved to gloat about his superior knowledge and pontificate about the wonders of galactic science whenever he had the opportunity. "Specifically, it's all related to entropy," he said. "As everyone knows, entropy is part of the basic laws of thermodynamics. Entropy is always increasing as everything gradually wears out and decays. Stars burn out, ice melts, mountains wear down. Everything and everyone march toward the inescapable heat death of the universe at the end of time, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. You cannot create or destroy energy, and you cannot escape entropy. Except in special circumstances, that is. You see, unlike everything else in the universe, life exhibits negative entropy, albeit in very localized forms. Life alone seems to defy the increasing entropy of things around it. Rather than order descending into chaos, life takes chaos and creates order from it, though it takes a little energy to do so. For instance, life can take a warm soup of organic chemicals and create highly ordered, very complex life forms. Every living creature is literally a font of negative entropy, something that scientists in my civilization learned to harvest a very long time ago. Life, you see, is precious for many reasons. First of all, it is very rare. At least intelligent life is. But more importantly, wherever there is life, there is also negentropic potential waiting to be tapped. The more complex the life form, the greater the negative entropy. Millennia ago, our scientists learned how to tap into the negative entropy that is life and store it. We can then use that entropic potential to heal and repair things, to prolong life, and given enough negentropy, we can even achieve virtual immortality. For a civilization that spans multiple galaxies and that has technologies that can achieve almost anything imaginable, this precious energy source is the most valuable commodity that exists. And that's ultimately what I have come to your planet for. I interrupted, saying, "But you're essentially talking about life force, aren't you? You are literally talking about sucking the life force out of living things." "Well, yes," interjected Glactyl, "but you need to appreciate that we have strict rules about where and when such harvesting can be performed. For instance, we are not allowed to harvest the life force from intelligent beings, or any sapient being, for that matter, that is self-aware. Here on your planet, that means we cannot kill people or primates, elephants, whales, dolphins, or even pigs, and most dogs. But we are allowed to tap and store the negative entropy from most lesser life forms." "But why cattle?" I asked. "That's why you bought this place, right? To suck the life force out of these animals?" "Yes, that's true, and the answer to your question should be obvious. First, cattle are among the largest animals that we are allowed to harvest. Also, they are quite abundant on your world, since they are bred and raised as a primary food source. In fact, other than humans, they are the most numerous large mammals. Your country has about 95 million head of cattle, but only 93 million dogs and 91 million cats. Livestock is the ideal source of life force on this world that is available for harvesting. And your people have come here for centuries to harvest them, right?" "Yes, that's true. Sometimes visitors have come here and done so. However, they usually left with only paltry amounts of life force. In the past millennia, cattle were scarce and scattered over large areas. Negentropy gatherers would literally have to chase down and catch each creature and harvest them one at a time. On a trip to this world, even after considerable effort, visitors might leave after harvesting less than 1,000 beasts. Those who did so were usually just being opportunistic. To be honest, coming here for that purpose would never be worth the trip." And yes, before you say it, such visitations were the source of stories about UFOs, cattle mutilations, and anal probes. Previous hunters never worried about hiding their handiwork. In any case, the situation nowadays is entirely different. In recent years, you have bred massive quantities of these animals, and you gather them and bring them places like this. It makes harvesting their life force so much easier. "But why can't you harvest other forms of life for your negative energy?" "That's entropy, not energy. They are different. But the answer to your question is that the lower the smaller the life, the less there is to harvest. Below a certain size, it takes more energy to drain animals or fish than you get trying to drain them." "Well then, what about trees? Why not harvest them? There are lots of huge trees." "That's actually a good question. While the life force of plants is much less than in animals, some trees do, in fact, possess a great deal. The problem is that the majority of their life force is not in the trunk or the leaves. Most of the concentrated life force in plants resides in their roots, underground. I will let you imagine the effort it would take to dig up the root ball of a giant redwood tree to harvest. Once again, it's just not worth the effort. Anyway, all of these cattle are going to be killed anyway, for food. All I am planning to do is drain their negative entropy before they are processed into meat products. Otherwise, the most valuable aspect of these creatures will be wasted and lost." I shook my head. Everything he said made sense, but it just didn't seem right somehow. "I guess I just don't understand what's so important about the life force of a single cow." "Well," said Glactyl, standing up from his chair, "I guess I should just show you." Reaching into the pocket of his jeans, he pulled out a small capsule. It glowed faintly green, and with a small twist, he unscrewed the top and tossed the ampoule across the room. There was a brief burst of light, and a bubble of green energy grew quickly and expanded until it reached a diameter of perhaps 6 or 7 feet before dissipating. The results, however, were dramatic. The office appeared to be more than a decade old, and it looked well used. Outside of where the bubble had been, it looked unchanged, but inside, everything seemed renewed. Outside, the carpet was worn and faded, but where Glactyl had dropped the capsule, the colors were sharp and vibrant, as if it were brand new. On a table that had been at the edge of the entropic field, half of the surface was dull and worn, scuffed and scratched, but the other half looked newly polished and bright. The contrast with the rest of the room was stark. Before the release of entropic energy, everything had appeared normal, but now I could see how much the color of the walls had faded over the years. On one side of the office, the walls looked freshly painted. On the other side, the walls were dull and had started to chip and peel near the edge of the floor. I guess my jaw must have dropped a little because Glactyl said, "And that is just raw negative entropy. If refined, the life force in one of these tiny flasks can extend life for a decade. A handful would allow you to live for a century, and a shoebox full of them would sustain you for a millennium. Imagine how much people would pay for a single one of these. Now, imagine how many times more rich patrons out in the galaxy would pay. A single crate of these would make me richer than any trip I have ever made, and I am planning on harvesting more than 9 million such containers a year." I found myself speechless and began wondering if I might acquire a few of these items before Glactyl filled his quota and left for good. While Glactyl had his plans, it took a lot of effort to execute them. He had not fully purchased all 15 slaughterhouses on his list. Rather, he had convinced the owners to outsource the killing operations to his new company, Shiva Logistics. That particular point in this company's operations was traditionally quite troublesome. Turnover was high, and therefore workers were often poorly trained. This made mistakes and injuries relatively common. When he had first proposed taking over this portion of operations, management had been reluctant to consider his offer. However, Glactyl planted some disinformation in the form of threats from animal rights activists and what he called vegan terrorists. He even sent a bomb to the plant. You should note that while the explosives inside the package were real, they weren't dangerous, since the detonators were fake. In any case, the incident scared the owners enough to believe that additional security was needed. Glactyl was then tasked with automating the killing process and providing security to keep unauthorized employees, undercover animal activists, covert photojournalists, and eco-terrorists away from that potential bottleneck. His work was deemed critical since, if those operations were interrupted, the entire processing line would be halted. It took a month before the new automated equipment was installed. I was there when it was assembled and tested. It was there at the kill point where I first watched cattle being killed. As a cow was hurried down a chute, it was led up to a small platform. Traditionally, cattle were killed using a captive bolt gun that punched a hole in their skulls, right between the eyes, killing them instantly. However, because the lines moved so quickly and many workers were barely trained, the technique often failed to render the animals insensible to pain. The new process was entirely automated, and not a single person was actually stationed in the room, except for me. Under normal operations, no one would ever be allowed inside except to perform periodic cleaning and maintenance on the robotic equipment. As the cow reached the platform, the walls on either side of the chute moved to hold the animal. A robotic arm jammed a 30-inch probe up its backside to drain its life force. Then, a low humming sounded as it was extracted. Accompanying the operation was a gut-wrenching plaintive wail from the beast, a sound that tore at me as if I were being slain. The last act in the process occurred when the anal probe was retracted and another robot arm reached out and then punched a hole in the animal's skull so that no one outside would realize how the animal had really died. Then, the walls retracted to let the beast collapse onto another conveyor, where it exited the killing room and entered the processing plant, where the hooves, head, and hide were removed before the carcass was gutted and bled. That was essentially the entire process. Cattle arrived from one direction, and the sides of beef exited out the other. I fled the room and wondered how people could handle slaughtering all these cattle before it was automated. That was also when I decided that I would never eat a hamburger again. Once the automated equipment was installed, My primary responsibilities were to oversee security, the installation of cameras and motion detectors, alarms, and monitoring. The main purpose of security was to keep everyone out of the killing room, so no one would really know what was going on in there. Of course, the real reason Glactyl and I needed security was to safeguard the vials of life force that were harvested. Each head of cattle produced a single capsule of glowing green energy, which was dropped into a vault underneath the equipment, where they were picked up and transported to his ship once a week. Every day, I had to visit a different facility, checking that the security was maintained at the highest level and that operations were running smoothly. It was grueling work. I had to fly to a different facility every morning and inspect it in the afternoon before traveling to a different slaughterhouse. It bothered me that I was a billionaire, but working 60-hour weeks at Glactyl's bidding. But he didn't trust anyone else and didn't want anyone to discover the real inner workings of the automated life force harvesting operation. I also had to set up procedures for when inspectors arrived. When that occurred, the automated operations usually only had a minute or two to switch from draining life force and revert to the more traditional method using the bolt gun. In a few cases, I was able to pay bribes to inspectors to sign off on the operations without ever entering the facility. In other cases, I had to be able to stall inspectors long enough to switch over the robotic operations while security prepared to escort the visitors inside. Glactyl ran a tight ship. Apparently, he had worked at a life force harvesting operation before changing his career to sales. He proudly announced that his collection operations had the capacity to produce 9 million life force samples a year, rivaling some of the larger facilities operating across the galaxy. 9 million a year was a lot. That equated to more than 30,000 a day. Thousands of cattle each day at each plant. That meant a sustained rate of more than 100 an hour at each plant, despite downtimes to clean the facility and maintain the automated equipment. The meat processing companies we serviced were grateful to pay someone else for the expensive equipment and to remove all human involvement. Glactyl, of course, couldn't have cared less about the costs. He only wanted those precious samples of life force. After about 6 months, I decided that I needed a break and told Glactyl that I needed a vacation for a couple of months. He agreed, but told me that I would need to find and train a replacement. That's when we hired Jeremy. Glactyl personally vetted him and selected him from a lengthy list of candidates. He seemed capable and reliable, so I trained him on the operations and his routine interactions with company personnel, security, and government inspectors. After a month, I felt comfortable leaving him while I left. Of course, he didn't know about the life force harvesting, but he never seemed interested in the inner workings of the kill cube, as we had come to call it. Anyway, I left to go to relax and live the life of a billionaire. For the first couple of months, I traveled to resorts in Bora Bora, luxurious accommodations in Tahiti, mansions in Madagascar, chateaus in Montenegro, villas in Tuscany, and pleasure palaces in Dubai. Then, one day, I got an urgent call from Glactyl. "We have a problem," he said. "Jeremy has discovered that something's going on, and he suspects that we're up to something nefarious. Oh, he doesn't know I'm an extraterrestrial, but he thinks I might be an agent of a foreign government who could be planning to poison the U.S. food supply." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Well, I have isolated him for the time being. I sent him on a trip away from the plants and made up some errand, but I need you to come back so we can figure out what to do with him." I sighed, saying, Okay, I can be there soon." Overall, it was disappointing. I was just getting to know Anastasia and the twins, but I decided that would have to wait. So I sent the 3 of them to go wait for me on my 200-foot yacht and took my private jet to Glactyl's ship. We met on the bridge of Glactyl's spaceship. He showed me videos and emails that Jeremy had sent a friend expressing his concerns about our high levels of secrecy. It was clear he didn't know anything. All he had were suspicions. "What are our options?" I asked. "Well, we could always just tell him the truth, but he's potentially too ambitious, and I'm not sure we could trust him in the long term." "Maybe we could come up with a plausible story," I suggested. Maybe we could pretend to be the government setting up a sting for potential terrorists. Too risky. He might decide to check with other government agencies and then we'd have them involved. What if we used the compeller? I offered. That would probably work, but remember the effects are only temporary, and that might make him more suspicious when it does wear off. I suppose I could wipe his memory, said Glactyl. I wasn't surprised that he possessed such capabilities. In fact, I could do that over and over again, periodically, but over time he could turn into a mindless thrall. We discussed the alternatives for hours before we came up with a plan. First, we would compel him and convince him to quit. Then, we would break up the operations so that no one knows the entire process. We would compartmentalize each piece separately. Maintenance workers would only know about the equipment, but not even really what it did. Security would know nothing about the inner operations of the kill cubes. Armored guards who collect caches of ampules would never know what they were transporting. We would get many people doing much smaller tasks. But I would still need to be on call for when problems arose or when special work needed to be performed, like bribing new officials or swapping out and vetting new employees. Okay, I finally replied, but you can't demand more than 50% of my time. I have a life, you know. Yes, said Glactyl, and I assure you, I appreciate your loyalty and diligence. And that's the way things continued for more than a year. After a while, I grew quite comfortable with my new lifestyle. I only got called by Glactyl often enough to break up the boredom of endless luxury. But then, one day, Glactyl called in a panic. You need to come right away, he said. There's an emergency. What is it? I asked. I can't tell you. You have to come and see. How quickly can you be here? Tomorrow? I suggested. That's too long, he replied. I'll come over in my ship and teleport you on board. Really? Yes, just stay where you are for a while. I'll pick you up in about 30 minutes. If I travel faster than that, I'll set off all sorts of alarms at NORAD. Okay, I said. Whatever you say. He terminated the call and left me wondering what the trouble could be. Then I decided I was hungry and went to the kitchen to make a sandwich to eat while I waited. I had barely finished making it when I found myself standing on the bridge of his ship. Half choking on my sandwich, I barked, What the? I thought you said 30 minutes. It's barely been 5. I decided it was too urgent, he replied. I don't care if I was seen. It was the first time that I had ever seen Glactyl not wearing a disguise of some sort. I finally saw him in his real form. He stood about 5'5" and barely weighed 150 pounds. He had large eyes, thin arms, and long, delicate fingers. He was hairless and covered with leathery skin that was blue-green in color, and he looked like a chameleon standing on his hind legs. His eyes blinked rapidly as he manipulated the controls of his ship. Through the view screen, I watched our ship dash across the surface of the planet below. We zoomed through the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, probably leaving an ionization trail that looked like an incoming meteor or a missile. I was beginning to worry now. I had never seen Glactyl so upset. We finally came to a stop over the Smithfield plant, hovering in place with the invisibility screens in place. There is something I need you to see, he said, pointing through the view screen at the small copse of trees outside the plant. Where? I asked. There, he said, pointing again. Look, we are being watched. By whom? The government? No, worse. The galactic authorities? No, still worse. Who then? Them, he said, as he inched the ship closer to the trees. I looked and saw 3 men in the distance, tall, thin, and wearing dark trench coats. They did look mysterious, but I had no clue who they could be. You mean those 3 guys? They don't look that scary to me. Yes, but look at them through this, he said, handing me a pair of thick goggles with multicolored lenses. As I put them on, I asked, What are these? They're spectral converters. They allow you to see electromagnetic emissions that are far beyond your visible spectrum. I looked and saw the three strangers glowing with a faint purple light. So, what is that? Those are transdimensional auras. You mean they are from another dimension? No. The type of radiation you're seeing is characteristic of high-intensity temporal energy. Temporal? You mean as in time? Yes, precisely. Those creatures are time travelers. What? This is bad. Oh, this is very bad, he muttered. Why? What does this mean? I asked. Let me explain. The galactic community is aware that we are periodically visited by time travelers. They are apparently from very far in the future, since no one in known space has ever figured out how to travel in time yet. However, if that is the case, then they would be from a future that is so much more advanced than us, that they make me look like some kind of hillbilly dirt digger. They are almost never seen, and they never interact with anyone. Most people think they are just stories, but I know someone who has encountered them before, so I know they are for real. But what does that mean? I asked again. I was getting tired of asking that question. All I know is that they never show up except when something terrible is about to happen. Something bad? Yes, they only show up before major disasters. I mean planet-level catastrophes, world-wrecking, truly apocalyptic events. But why are they here? To stop whatever's going to happen? No, they never do that. They just watch and document what happens. Then they just leave. Why? No one knows. It's just that whenever they show up anywhere, very, very bad things happen. So what do you think is going to happen? I don't know. I'm not sure I even want to know. The only thing that I know for certain is that it's time for me to pack up operations and leave. First, however, I need your help. You've got to go collect all the life force ampules that are still at the harvesting sites. Okay, but then what? Well, I'll sign everything over to you, of course. We have a little time. They always show up a month or so before whatever event they've come to witness. That way they can create a baseline of what things were like before the whatever happens. Anyway, I suggest that you sell the equipment and the businesses to whoever you can sell them to the quickest. Take whatever money you can, and then you go hide in a mountain cave somewhere. You're really serious, I said. I seriously wondered if he was going to have some sort of mental breakdown. Yes, this is not something to joke about. Then he paused and said, Do you remember that old song we discussed once? The Gambler? Yeah, you said that you need to know when to hold them and when to fold them. So you're thinking of folding things up like we did before? No, I was thinking of the next part of that song. What? Know when to walk away? Actually, I've decided that this is the time to run. Traveling Salesman continues in Part 4, when Bob and Glactyl accidentally set off the zombie apocalypse. Thank you for listening. We love our listeners, fans, and patrons here at Untold Tales, and we would love to hear from you. Please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, letting us know what your favorite story has been in our 3 seasons of storytelling so far. We'd love to continue shaping our podcast with stories that you'd like to hear. As always, thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.